Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lempe, your regular host, and today is the first in a series of episodes with separate Special Operations, particularly Special Operations Command, referred to as SOCOM, about the recruiting process, what it takes to become a member of the Special Forces,
and how someone like you can best prepare yourself should you choose to take your career to the next level.
Whether you're in the ADF or you're thinking about joining through the ADF careers pathway, you're bound to get some helpful information, advice and tips straight from the source. SOCOM is secretive by design, and today we get to sort of peer behind the curtains and get an insight which is incredibly rare into the SOCOM world. To kick off our series, I'm joined by the Officer Commanding of Selection Wing, Major J. He is heavily involved in the process for selecting the next generation of members joining Special Operations Command. Welcome.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate you coming up here to discuss the recruitment process for SOCOM with us.
I suppose what I want to do first is set some context for where you sit in the broader organisation. But what happens in Selection Wing?
Yeah, so Selection Wing sits within the Australian Defence Force School of Special Operations, and it is responsible for the attraction, screening, selection, training and development of SOCOM's workforce. And Selection Wing, we focus on that attract, screen and select function to make sure that we're getting the right people and making sure that those out there that may be interested in service in SOCOM are aware of the opportunities and understand the requirements so that they can then submit an application and hopefully start the process of coming into the command. For anyone interested in serving in our units, so being SASR, 2 Commando, 1 Commando, Special Operations Engineer Regiment, or even the Special Operations Logistics Squadron, they will typically start their journey of coming into the command by engaging with Selection Wing.
You talked about a few different units there, and I want to make the argument that the significant coverage, and everyone knows about 2 Commando and SASR and the elite reputations of both units. Seems to me like there must be a huge volume of people applying. Do you see that level of interest in Selection Wing?
Yeah, we do. We typically do receive hundreds of applications each year for members putting their hands up and saying that they would like to have a crack at coming to serve in the command. And it's really about people that are seeking that additional opportunity to take their career or take their professional experience to that next level.
So that's an interesting point with the opportunity part. Like what opportunities do they get in those jobs and why do people choose to do that?
So service in SOCOM typically attracts people that are seeking a deeper level of purpose and a bit of a challenge. There are many benefits to service in SOCOM, and so what might be a motivating factor for one person might not necessarily for others. But what we find is that most people drawn to service in SOCOM are interested in the opportunities it affords them, being that they'll get exposure to high risk and high reward environments that the wider ADF are just not exposed to. Our members typically work in small teams with other highly motivated and like-minded individuals, and they have a real opportunity to make a strategic impact on the ADF's response to the various emerging strategic challenges we're currently facing. I'll also note that SOCOM really does invest in its people, and therefore that presents additional opportunities to continuously develop, whether that be through additional training, access to modern and cutting-edge equipment and technology, or through other professional development and education opportunities. And then finally, one of the biggest motivating factors and benefits of service in SOCOM really is the community. Internal to our units as well as the command overall, there's very much a sense of shared experience and motivation for our members, but that also extends to the families. There's a strong sense of community within the family networks, again, within the units and within the wider command, and that is certainly a benefit that we see or a benefit to our members.
And I suppose that stability is interesting because, I mean, a number of people I've spoken to construct this episode, I suppose, spoke to that certainty in location once they get... It's not the same for all units, but broadly, that's somewhat appealing to stay in the same location, whether that be at one or the other units or more broadly in SOCOM for a longer amount of time and, really bed in.
Yeah, broadly speaking, that is the case. It depends on what role and what job people go into. But given the amount of additional training and investment that the command makes in qualifying our members, we typically hope to retain them for as long as we can. And so generally speaking, members will get a little bit more certainty about their long-term posting profiles and where they can expect to serve over a number of years, as opposed to maybe just the one posting cycle ahead.
I suppose investment, and it would be remiss of me not to talk about personal investment, but more the financial side. Sort of, obviously there's perks that come along with it in terms of financial perks. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true as well. So again, because our members are expected to operate in high risk environments and a number of other expectations placed on our personnel, there are some additional salary benefits and allowances to compensate our members for those additional requirements. I will just add, though, that if you're joining SOCOMD because of a financial motivation, you've probably got the wrong idea.
Yeah. I could only imagine it. Yeah, I think that everyone thinks that it's flashy. The financial component is amazing. I think that would peril in comparison to the remainder of the opportunities that you get in SOCOM.
Absolutely.
Selection, I think, from an outsider looking in, has remained the same somewhat for many years. It's been the same sort of iteration and a split and all that sort of stuff, but as recently changed, and I think it's important to note that it has recently changed and gone to a common selection. What's prompted that change?
So that's based on a number of foundational changes that have happened within the command over the last few years, including our selection processes, but as well as our training systems. And we needed to adapt our recruitment and selection process to reflect that and make sure that it was still a world best standard.
So that's obviously wave tops on that process itself. But can you take us through what's changed in the recruitment process and I suppose what stayed the same?
We've now sort of shifted to a bit more of a persistent and proactive approach to make sure that we're educating interested members out in the wider ADF about the opportunities in SOCOM and encouraging them to submit an application to potentially come and serve with us. We're all about trying to attract and identify the right people with the right skills at the right time, and therefore we want potential candidates to be as informed about the process as possible. As a result of these changes, we've also looked to streamline the process as much as possible for candidates. So to put it simply, you submit an expression of interest or an EOI along with a recent BFA result as the first step to commence your journey to coming into SOCOM. Once you've submitted your EOI, you'll hopefully be panelled to attend a multi-day program, and that is the Special Forces Assessment Program, which we refer to as the SFAP, and that's held regularly throughout the year at Holsworthy Barracks in Sydney for members to come down and attend when they're available and approved to be released. On the assessment program, we'll assess your fitness, your cognitive capacity, and really one of the best benefits of attending the assessment program is that you'll receive additional information and education about SOCOM, each unit and core function, so that you can make the most informed decision as possible about where you may want to serve if you continue on the journey to come into to SOCOM.
Yeah, so let's zoom in on that journey piece. So SFAP, or Special Forces Assessment Program, I suppose there must be a physical testing component of that. Do we still do SFET, and sort of what are those physical requirements on the Special Forces Assessment Program?
So as part of the assessment program, you'll conduct the Special Forces Entry Test, which again is unchanged from previous years. So candidates or applicants are still required to complete cadence push-ups, cadence heaves, a 3.2 kilometre weight-loaded run, the SF swim test, and a weight-loaded march best effort within 90 minutes, and those are all to set standards, which if you attend one of the assessment programs, you'll know what those standards are and you'll know the benchmarks that you need to achieve. If you're successful through the assessment program, you'll then be invited to submit an application to serve in SOCOM, and then from there you'll start your journey towards being ready and hopefully being panelled to attend the selection course.
So yeah, we've been panelled, we're successful, and we're sort of looking at going on now selection. What does that look like now that we have a common selection?
So the Special Forces selection course is a common selection course for all of the core functions and pathways into the command. But the foundational and fundamental processes of that selection course and the screening prior to it have not changed. Selection is still fundamentally a challenging and difficult experience by design. And it involves a number of physical and cognitive based activities that are completed in arduous and ambiguous and uncertain and unfamiliar environments so that we can draw the most out of the candidates and really get a true assessment of whether or not they're suitable to serve in the command. The way we do that is based off 13 attributes that we utilise to assess a member's character, and it is all about character.
So yeah, I think that's the main point to get out of that is, when we talk about remaining the same, it is still incredibly difficult. There is I think would be a fallacy to argue that it's any easier, and it's incredibly difficult. That's being selection.
So you talked about high level stuff though, and I suppose the listeners probably want a little bit more detail and to help them throughout the process, but want to zoom right in on the process and get a little bit more meaty.
So why the change to submitting an EOI? Does it go through the chain of command or the individual's chain of command? And why do I need to include my BFA results?
In order to streamline the process and make it a little bit more easy at the front end, all you have to do is submit the EOI, which just goes up to your immediate supervisor, your OC or equivalent, and that is only authorising you to be released to attend the assessment program. So they're not being asked to endorse your application at that point. And then that way you can come down, conduct the assessment program, and then based on your results, you may be then invited to submit that application, which will still go up for that higher level chain of command endorsement for your application. And the reason for including the BFA results is so that members demonstrate to us that they have the requisite baseline fitness that we could then expect they'd have a reasonable chance of being able to pass the SFED and the other physical assessments that are part of the program. And that also provides the members a degree of confidence that the standards we have set for that BFA, and there are minimum standards that they need to pass that to be panelled on the assessment program, provides them a degree of confidence that if they're above those minimum standards, then we believe they've probably got a reasonable chance of passing the entry test.
And I suppose previously that application form, and then you'd launch into medical and psych as a somewhat of a drawn out process. Then the fitness and suitability assessments. How does the EOI process flip that?
Yeah, so by doing the EOI up front and then coming and conducting the assessment program, based on how you perform on the assessment program, you'll get a debrief on whether or not you've performed to a standard that we believe you're likely to be panelled on selection or not. If we tell you that you're not quite at the standard yet, you're able to go away, work on those areas that you need to improve, and then potentially come back and reattempt another assessment program at a later date. For the members that have met the standards and we believe have a reasonable chance of getting panelled on selection, they're then invited to submit the application for service in SOCOM, and that they can then commence their medical and psych screening requirements prior to coming on selection.
So the EOI has to go through the chain of command, and some people might be nervous about sending that up. And how do you deal with that chain of command aspect?
So the EOI is approved by your immediate supervisor, so your OC or equivalent. But again, that's just to authorise you to come down and undertake the testing. It's a 3-day program. You're not going to be out of the unit for a long period of time. But then on the back end of that, you'll be able to go back to your unit and provide them an indication of how well you performed and the likelihood of you going away on selection and potentially coming into the command.
And I suppose that move to multiple testings per year, not just one, or there are a number of times for you to come down and test, which should work with your chain of command to be more flexible.
Absolutely, and again, that's a reason why we've made these changes to enhance the amount of flexibility and opportunity that members have to come down and undertake the testing and the screening, and hopefully that translates to their units as well, who can then say, oh, unfortunately we can't release you for this session, but we're more than happy for you to attend in a month or 2 months or something like that, and that way members can negotiate with their units and find the right time that suits everyone for them to come down and complete the screening and the assessment, and ideally still make the same selection window, because historically speaking, if you weren't releasable during that narrow testing window prior to the selection course, then you may have to wait 12 months for the next opportunity. We've tried to alleviate this with the changes we've brought in.
So I suppose we now know the EOI process, and we're staring down the barrel of submitting an EOI. We spoke about before how everyone knows about SSR and 2 Commando, and so but more broadly, what roles are available to put onto the EOI sheet before you submit it?
So that's just, I'll highlight real quickly, that's one of the benefits of the EOI process, that whereas historically members would submit their application kind of blind and have to tick a box for which unit they would like to go to. Now, by submitting the EOI, they can elect for a number of roles that they may have an interest in, and then come down on the assessment program and learn more about it before they submit a final preference. But then going back to your question with regards to what roles are available and what individuals might be suited towards, that really depends on you as an individual and your background and your motivation and the type of work you might be interested in doing should you come into the command. Where or what role you can go into will depend to a degree on your previous service and your background, because some roles are only available to members with particular trade or qualifications. As an overview of the roles available within SOCOM, probably the most well-known role is the Special Forces Operator, and that is historically who has been the SASR Trooper or the Commando from the 1st and 2nd Commando Regiments. That role has now evolved. So rather than being recruited to a specific unit, which is historically the way it's been done, our operators are now recruited against the core function that they will fulfill once they come into the command. So those core functions are special reconnaissance, strike and recovery, and special warfare. And each one of those aligned to one of the SF units. And that is then where those members can expect to spend majority of their time once they're qualified and serving in the command, being SASR in Perth or the 1st and 2nd Commando Regiments in Sydney. That role, the SF operator role, is open to all current serving ADF members from all services and all corps, as well as direct entry civilians that come in through the Special Forces direct recruiting scheme. The next role that I'll mention is the SF engineer role. These are members who integrate both with the SF operators across each of the core functions, but then also conduct independent operations under their own core function, which is technical enablement. SF engineers provide a highly specialised capability to SOCOM in the area of counter CBRNE, being counter chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear and explosive, threat mitigation and reduction. They also deliver some additional highly specialised capabilities that support SOCOM and its mission. SF engineers have historically been drawn from the Army, from the Corps of the Royal Australian Engineers. However, in the last couple of years, that role has now become open to all services and all corps. And we've actually seen great success of a number of members come from outside the combat engineer background, which has been the historical backbone of that capability. And by opening up the talent pool to other pers that possess the technical and problem-solving mindset that is right for that capability, we've really seen an advancement of the SF engineer role. SF engineers serve within the Special Operations Engineer Regiment, which is based in Sydney. Now I'll just quickly touch on the roles that are currently only available to serving Army personnel. And that's because those are the roles that rely on the members that already have a specialised or technical background and a particular trade qualification. And that's because we bring these members into the command to fulfil that role just within a special operations context. So depending on what your base trade is, you may have a different recruitment process and entrance pathway into SOCOM. So the first ones that I'll mention are our signallers and our medics. Now, signallers and medics can either be SF or SOF. I understand that can be a bit of a confusing distinction, but effectively what that means is SF signallers and medics, they undertake a portion of the selection course, and then if they're successful and are selected, they undertake additional training to be able to integrate directly with the operators and the engineers at the tactical level and provide that capability at the tactical level. Our SOF signallers and medics, they don't undertake part of selection, but they do conduct a detailed screening before then being posted into the command. They'll still receive some of the tactical integration training, not all, but their main role will not be providing direct support to an SF team at the tactical level, but will rather be providing that higher level of care or SIG support at a headquarters element or a rear element or the higher echelon. And then finally, I'll just touch on the personnel who are referred to as our SOF enablers. These are our logisticians, intelligence staff, clerks, transportees, workshop staff, vehicle mechanics, armourers, etc. These members don't undertake selection, but again, based on their pre-existing trade and qualification, they may need to undertake certain levels of screening and attend the assessment program prior to being posted into the command. I appreciate that's a lot of information. It's all available on our website on the DPN, and I encourage people to go there and get as much information about the individual roles as possible.
And I think that's like more broadly a lot of different roles and a lot of different ways into SOCOM to help, I suppose, and be part of the system. But that's all the roles now. So for the people who are doing the assessment program and the candidates doing the assessment program, how do they sort of nominate once they've absolutely smashed the assessment program out of the park? And there we talked before about being completely ready for moving on with whichever entry path you go into SOCOM with. How do they nominate their chosen preference after that assessment program, and then also follow on who actually has to do selection?
Yeah, so applicants, once they've completed the assessment program, are provided a detailed debrief on their performance and their suitability for each of the role or roles that they screen for, and then the likelihood of them securing a spot on selection if that's necessary for the roles they're going after. Successful applicants are then invited to submit their application for service in SOCOM, and it's on that form that they nominate their specified preference for which role or roles they'd like to be considered for selection or posting into the command. And then just with regards to who has to undertake selection and who doesn't. So again, it does depend on the role you formally nominate in your preferences. But applicants for the SOF roles, so the SOF signalers, the SOF medics, the SOF enablers, they don't need to undertake selection. Again, they may need to do some screening and attend the assessment program prior to coming into the command, but not all roles require that. Applicants for the SF roles, so the SF operators, the SF engineers, the SF SIGs and SF medics, they must undertake selection and then be selected to be able to conduct or commence their reinforcement training and then serve in the command in that role. Selection has now been modularised to enable candidates for the various roles to be properly assessed prior to then being selected. So there are two modules. So the SF operator candidates must complete Module 1 and 2, which is approximately 21 days, whereas the SF engineer, the SF SIGs and the SF medics are only required to complete Module 1, which at this stage is approximately 8 to 12 days. Another important point to note with regards to preferences is that members will only be considered for selection against the roles they have formally nominated in their application form. And so they're not then able to somewhere else down the pipeline say, oh, I would rather go to be an SF operator under this different core function if they haven't preferenced it, or I want to be an SF engineer now because they've been unsuccessful through selection as an operator candidate. If they haven't nominated that in their application form, then they won't be considered. So again, that's just another reason while we encourage members to consider the variety of roles they may like to serve in and nominate multiple preferences on their application forms.
So you talked about, so right person, existing competencies, all those sorts of things. I suppose, how do you get that right person with the right skills at the right time? What type of person is SOCOM looking for?
So the job and task of our members is to undertake operations in highly complex environments, very often isolated from friendly forces and dealing with a significant amount of ambiguity and uncertainty. So anyone that we place in that situation has to be able to handle high levels of stress, danger and hardship so that we can rely on them to deliver unconventional solutions to the complex problems we're asked to solve. Therefore, we're looking for high-performing individuals, but that come from diverse backgrounds. There is no mold, there is no stereotypical SF soldier, and there's no one type of person that is more or less likely to pass all of the screening and selection processes. That is because we select our individuals based on their character rather than any particular physical, intellectual, or other traits. We are seeking individuals who are physically fit and do possess a high level of emotional intelligence and high technical and trade proficiency, and therefore your past experiences, both personally and professionally, will come into play. But all of that comes down to how you handle stress and whether you can function in an ambiguous environment, utilising your communication and planning skills, your problem-solving skills, and your ability to integrate and empathise with members from different backgrounds and different cultures to be able to achieve the mission. So it's not brawn versus brains or brains versus brawn or anything like that, because we are looking for that well-rounded individual. Someone can be absolutely the smartest person in the world, but they can't pass the physical barriers. Just the same, someone can be the most physically robust and capable individual, but you don't trust them to boil the kettle. So therefore, neither of those are suited, and we're looking for that well-rounded individual who is really optimised, both mind and body, to deliver the effects we're looking for in SOCOM. And that is why we utilise our SOCOM 13 attributes when we're selecting our individuals. And these are the personality traits and values that we can observe members displaying on selection and through the screening process as well. And therefore, irrespective of the role, we utilise the 13 attributes to help us determine whether they're a suitable person to come and serve in the command.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's like, oh, you're super fit. You should probably attempt a selection and go to SOCOM. It's like you need a few different things. It's not just about fitness.
There's a bit more to it than that.
Yeah, and I suppose you talked about the 13 attributes. It's the 13 SOCOM attributes. What are they? And I suppose what are the common reasons candidates get removed from selection for these attributes specifically? I mean, that's the assessment criteria.
Yeah, so the 13 attributes, and I will list them because they're all important to know. And we certainly want to be upfront and clear about it. So it's leadership, trainability, teamwork, self-discipline, perseverance, initiative, adaptability, integrity, communication, emotional regulation, humility, independence, and judgment. Now, it's important to note that no one attribute is more important than the others. We don't prioritise them, we don't rank them or anything like that, because we utilise them to provide an overall assessment of a candidate's character. That being said, some of the attributes are a little bit more easy to work on to enhance and develop prior to coming on selection than others. And so one I will hit on is trainability. We have to rely on our members being able to learn new skills very rapidly and be able to put them into action almost immediately. The learning curve is very, very steep when you get on to qualification training and once you're in the command. And therefore, we don't have time to hold everyone's hand through the process, and we need our members to pick it up quickly. Therefore, trainability is a key attribute that is tested significantly on selection. But there are a number of resources out there to enable members to enhance their mental optimization and their skills to be able to improve their trainability. And we provide some of those resources through the recruitment process to anyone who's requested it. Another one I'll hit on is emotional regulation. You asked the question about why members might come off selection and linked to the attributes. Emotional regulation is the biggest one. From my perspective, what we find is that typically members self-select out of selection and remove themselves from the course, even if they have been performing well, because they get in their own heads and they start to doubt their own resolve, their own motivation, and their own capability.
And I imagine that moments go by once you've self-elected to remove yourself, and then you're like, oh, was I really there? Like, is that where I was? And I suppose that self-regulation comes into it, emotional regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. So being able to sort of maintain a consistent emotional mindset when you're going through these hard, arduous, and fatiguing experiences on selection is critical to being successful through the process. And then the last attribute that I'll hit on, and again, they are all equally important. I'm not preferencing one over the other, But paramount to service in SOCOM is an individual's integrity. We don't want people in the command that we can't trust, and the easiest way to get yourself removed from selection by the staff is to do the wrong thing and be dishonest about it. Integrity is absolutely paramount, and we expect our members. Everyone makes mistakes. We know that. We accept that. We're all human. But if you are dishonest about it, you will be removed from course very rapidly.
And I think that's like so now we know what those 13 SOCOM attributes are, and like you don't need to go back and write them down off the record for the audio. The ADFSO website has it listed, but we know now what the attributes are, and like if you seriously want to get selected, I suppose they're the key things to remember the entire time. But when people do pull off, and I've heard rumours about doing sort of an exit interview, or like as you come off selection or self-elect to remove, often you'll be able to have the opportunity to ask questions about why candidates removed themselves or were removed. I suppose what other factors or what reasons do people pull themselves off selection?
Yeah, so on the topic of exit interviews, like we respect a member putting their hand up, having a crack at selection and coming and giving it a go. And therefore, if they decide to remove themselves, or if they are removed by the staff, they will have an exit interview with the staff, and we will just talk them through their experience, what happened, and give them a bit of a debrief on how they were tracking and the observations we had made of them at that time. What we get from that as staff is a significant amount of data with regards to people's mindset and how they felt they were performing on the course and the like. And so therefore we can form a bit of a picture as to some of the common things that trip people up and end up tricking them into withdrawing. And those are things like having a pre-existing injury, coming onto the course that you've kind of been trying to ignore and pretend you don't have, because you've committed so much time to coming on selection, and you don't necessarily want to admit that you might not be in peak physical form. Other issues, and going back to the attribute with regard to emotional regulation, that negative thinking, that self-doubt, and those intrusive thoughts really do play a massive part in why members withdraw themselves, particularly when you're doing some of the tasks on selection where you're operating for long periods of time as an individual. You're on your own, you're not necessarily being supervised directly by staff, and so that's when those sort of thoughts can creep in and people can start to doubt their motivation. And then additionally, family or personal issues going on back home that, again, members have tried to manage as best as they can during their preparation, but then again, when they're out there on selection, they're fatigued, and they're starting to question their own motivation. Those kind of issues can start to snowball and really influence a member's priority for whether or not they want to stay on the course. Those are sort of the things we draw out of the exit interviews in terms of why members might self-withdraw. Going to issues where members are removed from course, navigation is actually a big one. So it is a foundational skill that anyone that attempts selection is expected to be able to navigate within a field environment. It is a core skill of any soldier, and therefore, it is something that is expected of our SOCOM members. When you're on selection, you'll do a number of navigation serials where you'll be operating on your own over long distances, and you'll be expected to be able to utilise a map and a compass and get yourself from point A to point B. That is just as fundamental as passing a 3.2 kilometre run or the 20 kilometre pack march. It is a core skill, it is a foundational skill, and it is unfortunately something that people tend to pay off. They think, oh yeah, I'm all good with nav. Whereas no, it is a perishable skill, and if you don't work on it and you don't make sure that you're good to go before selection, you will trip yourself up very, very quickly.
And I think, importantly, map and compass, like the over-reliance on GPS throughout the units, you cannot rely on that. You need to go back to the basics.
Yeah, no GPS on selection. It is all about those foundational, fundamental skills that are expected of Australian soldiers. Yeah,
because I suppose there's an assumption that they want to get to the advanced stuff, you know what I mean? They want to go to SF to do the advanced stuff, when in reality, like those basic soldier skills are assessed, I suppose.
To a point. So we're not assessing whether you can do the best section attack or whether you're the most squared away soldier in the field, because our RAF and our Navy candidates that come on that don't necessarily have that background in those types of roles, they're not disadvantaged by the fact that they don't know those things, because it's, again, about character. We're looking for the right type of people. So you might be the best infanteer in the world, but if you don't demonstrate the right type of character, then you're not going to be selected. Again, that doesn't mean that these skills aren't important. You need to be able to live and operate in a field environment in order to be successful through selection. For anyone that doesn't feel comfortable in that or doesn't have a strong background in that, those are additional things to work on before you attempt screening, and then definitely before you attempt selection.
And I suppose, so we go through, we have our NAV squared away, we've got all the family life sorted, our injury, we're at peak, and I'm going to let our next episode will be on, with the PTIs on physical preparation for selection and more broadly across the reinforcement training cycle. However, we've got all that nailed, we go through selection, and then I just want to jump back to operators for a moment and the common selection process. If they're deemed suitable to be an operator at the end of the selection, I suppose how do they get allocated to a unit now?
Yeah, so it's very important to know that service in SOCOM is entirely voluntary. So no one's going to be forced to serve somewhere that they're not willing to go to. So with the SF operator role, rather than being recruited to a unit, you now are recruited to one of the core functions, which are aligned to the unit. So the special warfare capability, so if you're an SF operator or special warfare operator, you would work within the 1 Commando Regiment, which is based in Sydney and Melbourne. If you're a special reconnaissance operator, you'd work at Special Air Service Regiment in Perth. And if you're a strike and recovery operator, you'd work at the 2nd Commando Regiment here in Sydney. So again, as part of the assessment program, we educate the members that attend on what each of those roles are and the likely employment you can expect to experience, and the roles and the jobs and the tasks that you'd be expected to fill within each of those core functions. The training and employment for each of those core functions does differ to a degree, and so again, members can elect or state a preference for where they have the most interest to serve. And if you have only selected one preference because you have your heart set on going to Perth or going to Sydney, you'll only be considered against that one preference. However, if you've selected multiple preferences, then you could be considered against all of them. And even if you're not offered your first preference, you may be offered your second preference. Again, it's an offer and acceptance system. So if you don't want to take that second or third preference, if it's offered to you, you can reject that, and that is entirely up to you. That would then just mean that if you want to reattempt to try and get your first preference again, you'd have to go around and complete the next screening and selection course, if possible.
So I suppose, and you talked about training, and I suppose it doesn't stop at selection in any way, shape or form. And you start moving forward into your chosen unit once you've accepted the offer. But how long does the reinforcement training cycle take for each unit, or across the board?
Yeah, so our members' qualification training, once they're through selection, we refer to that as the reinforcement training cycle. And depending on the role you go into, that could be anywhere between about 9 to 18 months. It does differ slightly based on the qualification or the core function you're looking to go into. But effectively through that process, you'll get all of your shoot, move, communicate skills, your insertion skills and the like. And then on the back end, you might do some of the more specialist or niche courses that really define the capability for that particular core function or that particular unit.
And I suppose this question is going to seem somewhat out of order, but it relates directly to the reinforcement training cycle. But so we have selection specifically. Australia has one of the longest selections in the world, out of America, the UK, a number of different countries. Ours is the longest. Many of theirs go for a week and a half. Why do we go through so much 21 days on selection?
Yeah, so there's really 2 points to note here. One is that a lot of our overseas partners actually combine their selection and then a good portion of their qualification training. And so whilst their selection might only go for a very short period of time, or a week or two, their qualification training that they include in their concept of selection can then go for months and months. And so they sort of look at that entire period as selection. They do that because they're more willing to accept some risk through the qualification training pipeline. And as a result, what you actually typically see from those countries is that they have more members fall off and be unsuccessful through that initial bit of qualification training. They're willing to accept that risk. But here in Australia, we have limited resources and we have limited spots on our selection course each year now for all of our different pathways. We can't take that risk up front and then have more members fall off once we commence the Rio and start to invest in their training and invest in their skills. So we're a little bit more stringent in our screening and selection up front to make sure that we're getting the right members through that process to then start reinforcement training. And again, what we typically see from that on the Australian side is we do have fewer members fall off through that process, and majority of our members are typically successful through the whole of reinforcement training. However, it does happen. Members are at times unsuccessful and do come off the pipeline. And so it's just important for everyone to know that they need to deliver every day on reinforcement training, and they need to maintain their skills and maintain that intensity through that process, because the training curve is very, very steep and only gets harder as you go through the pipeline. But yeah, that's the reason why we put so much emphasis on screening and selection here in Australia.
So now we've talked to the reinforcement training cycle, a longer selection. We've spoken to roles, the new EOI process. A lot of information, obviously, it's all well summarised in this audio. But if anyone wants any more information and really wants to drill down on that, where can they go?
Yeah, and we really encourage members to seek out more information and be as educated about the processes and the expectations as possible. There is a lot of advice out there about selection and about service in the command, but given the recent changes, some of it's a bit outdated. And so we would just really encourage members to come directly to the source, to ADF SSO, to get the most up-to-date and accurate information. So just jump on the DPN and search Joint Special Forces or Joint Special Operations, and that'll take you straight to our website, and that's where you can find the latest information. We also have additional resources available, and the PDIs will take you through the physical resources when you speak to them next week. But we also have mental optimization resources and a number of other things that will support members through that journey so that they are optimized and at the best point possible when they look to commence screening and then when they look to undertake selection. And then self-education is also very, very important. Learn as much as you can about SOCOM's role within the wider strategic picture for the Army and for ADF. And then also look for those resources that can help you enhance and refine those attributes regarding, emotional intelligence, trainability and the like. And that way you can just ensure that you're at peak performance when you look to commence the process.
And I suppose for the civilians that are extremely keen on it and a lifelong career in the SF, where do they go? And they've been battling our acronyms the entire audio recording, but where do they go to get more information?
Yeah, so for any non-currently serving persons listening to this podcast that are interested in pursuing a career and looking at the direct recruiting scheme, go to the ADF Careers website and search Special Forces Operator, and that's where they'll find the most up-to-date information about coming in through that program.
Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you very much.
An amazing insight into Special Operations Command and common selection. And like I said at the top of the episode, this is the first in a series of episodes on Special Operations Command and selection. Subscribe to this channel and stay tuned for next week's episode where we talk to two PTIs from Special Operations Command about how to physically prepare for one of the most gruelling and physically demanding selection courses in the world.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.